Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, October 30th, 2024 edition of the SANS and Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich and I'm recording from Jacksonville, Florida. Well, let's start today with a vulnerability in CyberPanel. CyberPanel is one of those web applications that are often used by virtual hosting providers to allow customers to manage their servers. So you can enable various services like SSH or FTP if you insist, and do it all via a convenient web-based interface. Software like this has had a rich history of vulnerabilities. cPanel and such is a very similar tool, probably a little bit more used than CyberPanel. And this new vulnerability, which was patched only today, does allow random code execution without authentication. The vulnerability was found by Trey Ant, that's the alias being used here, and was reported to CyberPanel, who did release that patch today. I'm not exactly sure how the exact disclosure here worked. Looks like it was only reported like a week or so ago, so CyberPanel was pretty quick with coming up with a patch for this particular issue. But the blog post by Trey Ant does also outline some sort of more structural, fundamental issues with the software that make it likely that there are other similar vulnerabilities present here. So if you're using CyberPanel, definitely be careful. As usual, try to restrict access, which can be tricky in these situations, and well, maybe learn how to administer your servers with SSH. And sticking with web applications here, we do also have a new fix for a vulnerability in Spring. Spring, of course, is one of those components that often pops up with critical vulnerabilities. This one has a CVSS score of 9.1. However, the applicability of this particular vulnerability is a little bit more limited. It does affect Spring WebFlux applications that rely on Spring security authorization rules, and the vulnerability can only be exploited if you actually are using Spring's static resource support and if you have a non-permit all authorization rule applied to the static resources support. So not all Spring or WebFlux vulnerabilities are necessarily vulnerable. This would be a tricky one to really sort of figure out. Of course, the default thing you should do is patch, but given that some of these applications tend to be quite complex and a little bit fragile when it comes to patching, this is not probably something that you have to patch right now unless you know that your particular application falls into this specific set of categories. And researchers from Cyber wrote up an interesting attack that's in particular interesting for its use of RDP. Now, for a while now, we had attackers, in particular sort of in the ransomware realm, attack networks by finding exposed RDP hosts. In this case, that's not actually the initial access vector, more what's later being used for command and control, where the attacker first breaches the network and then enables RDP in order to be able to gain persistent access to a particular victim's system. This is something that you definitely have to get under control, how RDP is used in a network. It can also sometimes be enabled by users for what they think are reasonable purposes, but RDP is so often abused, you definitely must control how it's being used on your systems. There are a couple tips in the blog post also about how to better secure RDP. And Microsoft reported in a blog post that they now completely rolled out SMTP, DANE, and DNSSEC across their Outlook email domains. So the reason it's important is that DANE provides you with a safe way to figure out if a remote mail server does support TLS. This is in particular sort of for the mail server to a mail server interaction important, where you often rely on weaker mechanisms like, for example, Start TLS. There have been a couple of other technologies and protocols that have been proposed and implemented, like MTA STS is probably the more common one used these days, which sort of offers specific web files in order to advertise that your mail server does offer TLS. But DANE and DNSSEC, and the two have to implement together, so DANE does not work without DNSSEC. It's probably sort of the more efficient way to implement it, because you have to do DNS anyway in order to find a particular mail server. Since Microsoft, as one of the major email providers, in particular for businesses, is implementing this now, this may actually give some incentive to others to start implementing DANE. We'll see how it goes. The protocol has been around for quite a while, but in particular, the DNSSEC requirement has often kind of caused people to be careful about implementing it. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks again for listening, and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.